problems. When we are talking about proportion word problems, we are going to start applying everything that we've used in the past last week. So looking at the proportion word problems, this is proportions can be used to solve word problems in which there is a constant rate. It is very important to stay consistent when setting up a portion. The units must match on each side of the equal sign. Which of the following equations is valid proportion? Okay, so when I'm looking at these two equations, what we're talking about here is we're talking about this one or this one. Now, the key word here, it says stay consistent. So you want to make sure that you're actually staying consistent within the labels, okay? If I look at this example, I have miles to hours and then hours to miles. For this one over here, I have miles to miles and then hours to hours. Out of these two, this one right here is more consistent because I have the miles to miles that's consistently at the top, and then I have hours to hours at the bottom, which is consistent at the bottom. So a helpful hint is set up a key when writing proportions to make sure the unit stays consistent. So looking at example one, okay, it says Pete drove 224 miles in 4 hours. So I'm going to just write that ratio. I have 224 miles to 4 hours. And then if he drives at the same rate on Sunday, how long will it take him to drive 490 miles? So if I set up that ratio, I once again want to make sure that the 490 is first, because that's my miles, because that's the way I set it up at the top. We want to stay consistent. Two, and I'm going to put a question mark on the hours because we don't know the hours. It says how long. We have to figure out how long it's going to take us. So if we set up our proportions, let's go ahead and set that up. So the first ratio that I have is 224. And once again, we have, that's our miles over, remember our ratio can be put in a fraction, 4 hours. When we equal our proportion out with the other ratio, we want to make sure that we're staying consistent. Since I had miles at the top, I want to make sure that I keep miles at the top. So looking at my second ratio, I have 490 miles. But we do not know how long it's going to take us, and I don't have anything to put there. So this is where we apply our variable. I'm going to put x here for our variable. So this is our proportion here, and now we just solve. Now this is exactly what you guys did on Friday. So looking at the labels, if the labels are kind of confusing you here, you do not have to put these labels. It was more to just make sure that you guys know that, hey, this is exactly what I'm solving for here, okay? So I go ahead and start solving this. So now I have I multiply, I cross multiply. So I have 224 times x, and that gives me 224x. So I'm going to bring that down, equals, and then I have to cross multiply again diagonally, make sure that you are being diagonal with it. And now I have 490 times the 4, and that gives me 1,960. Now, the only other step that you have here after you guys set up your equation is you just got to divide. So remember, we divide here because I want to get x by itself, and by dividing by the coefficient, which is the number next to my variable here, I get my answer. So right here, I get the first ratio is 224 divided by 224. That is just 1. And 1x is exactly the same thing as x. So I'm just going to bring down x. And then I divide the other half. So looking at the other division problem I have on the other side of the equal sign, I have 1,960 divided by the 224. When I divide that, I get 8.75. And then our label here, please remember that we are just looking for one specific unit because they give us the constant rate already. We're just looking for the missing piece here. So it is only 8.75 hours. Do not put per or any of those labels. It is just hours. Okay. All right. So looking at number 2. And remember, guys, all you are really doing here is you're just dividing. The only thing when you get to set up that equation, all you're doing here is just dividing. So looking at number 2, I have approximately 4 out of the 5 students in Mrs. Haynes' 7th grade math class have cell phones. If there are 365 students in the 7th grade, how many would you have how many are expected to have a cell phone. So let's go ahead and make those ratios once again. So 4, oops, 4 to 5, okay? And that's cell phones. And then they want us to figure out the 7th grade total, okay? Now, how many would have expected a cell phone? If I look at the first ratio right here, the 5 students are the total amount of students that Mrs. Haynes has in her class. So this right here is total. And if I'm looking out of the 4, that's cell phones. So when I set up my next ratio here, I have that there are 365 students in the 7th grade. That is a total. So for my second ratio, the 365 would actually go second, and we don't know what our first number is just because we don't know how many students in the 7th grade actually have cell phones, which is when we set up our proportions. So looking at our first ratio, I'm going to set that up as a fraction. So 4 to 5, or 4 out of 5, I have 4 over 5. 4 is the number of cell phones and 5 is the total amount. When I set up my second ratio, we don't know that first number, which is the cell phones, and we have cell phones at the top right now. So I'm going to go ahead and just put X here. And at the bottom, that is our total. So we put the 365. And now we cross multiply. So I multiply my 5 times the X. And in reality, guys, you guys can go ahead and multiply whatever you want first. So if you wanted to multiply the 4 times the 365, that's completely fine. I just like putting X first, so I just multiplied the 5 times the X first. And now I have 4 times 365. 4 times 365 gives you 1,460. Once again, my goal here is to get X completely by itself, and right now it is not by itself. So in order to do that, I would have to divide by the number next to it, which is 5, and that is your coefficient. So when I divide by 5 on both sides, once again, 5 divided by 5 gives you 1, which is just X equals, and 1,460 divided by 5 is 292. Our label here would be students, because we're talking about those students with those cell phones. Okay, and we're going to keep going. Let's go ahead and do number 4 this time. So when you guys are given fractions in your problem, I would recommend to just switch them over to decimals, and also make sure that you're reading the directions, so then that way you know what exactly you should be rounding to. So if I look at my number 4, it says it takes 1 1/4 cups of milk to make 8 pancakes. So if I put that in a ratio, and once again, I'm going to go ahead and convert this mixed number into a decimal, and you guys can plug that into your calculators and it will give it to you in a decimal. 1 1/4 is 1.25, and the ratio to that is 8 pancakes. Okay, so that's milk, and this is pancakes. Same thing goes for the next part of my story problem here. It says how many cups of milk are needed to make 20 pancakes, okay? If I go back and look at my ratio, it gives me pancakes, the number for pancakes. So I have to figure out, am I going to put this first in the ratio or second to the ratio? If I'm being consistent to the ratio that was already given to me, pancakes is the second number, so I would put 20 pancakes as my second number. Now, the first part, which is your milk, we don't know how much milk we need in order to make 20 pancakes, so that's where we go ahead and use our variable, or I just put a question mark. So now to set up our proportion, I go ahead and make my first ratio into that fraction. So I start off with milk. I have 1.25 over our pancakes, which is 8, equals. Once again, you want to be consistent. So at the top, we put milk. I'm going to make sure I put milk at the top for the second ratio. We do not know that number. That is what we are trying to find. So I'm going to go ahead and put X as our variable. In reality, you guys can use whatever variable you guys want. And for the bottom part, both fractions will have to be pancakes if we're being consistent. And that second ratio right here, we did get 20 pancakes. So I would put 20. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and cross multiply. So this time I'm going to go ahead and do it the other way instead of how I did number 2. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply 1.25 times the 20. When I multiply 1.25 times 20, that does give me 25, equals, and then I cross multiply my other two numbers. I have 8 times x. Remember, when you multiply a number times a variable, we just put them together. So I have 8x. Now, nothing changes from what exactly how we were doing it at the top, those two examples. We are dividing by the number next to the variable, the coefficient, okay? That number here is 8. I would divide by 8 on both sides because that's the coefficient of our equation. Once again, if you're confused on what a coefficient is, it's the number next to the variable, okay? So 8 divided by 8, that's 1, which is the same thing as just x is equal to, and when I divide 25 divided by 8, I get 3.1. And the reason I'm leaving it at 3.1 because it says round to the nearest tenths. Our label here would be cups because we're talking about cups of milk. Another thing, also, we have been writing our x's to the left. If you don't like that x is on the right, how it is in my answer right now, you can rewrite it to x equals 3.1 cups. You do not have to keep it that way. You can put either one because they're exactly the same thing. We just flip them. Okay, and then we're going to do one more example at the bottom. So let's go ahead and let's look at, let's see. Let's look at number 6. So an online store receives 15 orders per day. At this rate, how many orders can they expect in the month of September? Now, if I look at this, we do have to be careful with this because there's a few different units that we're working with here. If I look at the first ratio that's given to me, I have 15 orders per day. Per day is just one day. So when I write that in a ratio, I have 15 orders to one day. Now, the second part of this problem, they want us to figure out how many orders can they expect for the month of September. So if I think about the month of September, and you guys can look at a calendar, there are 30 days in September. The reason that we have to switch it to days is because our starting ratio was days. So I want to make sure that I switch that month, just the one month, to days. Okay. So depending on whatever month they give you, you got to figure out how many days there are in that month. So September does have 30 days. So I'm going to go ahead and put that as our second number because we want to stay consistent. Now the orders, that's exactly what we're trying to figure out. And that is our first part of the ratio. So we can't put anything there. So we can put X orders because we do not know what the number is. And that's what we're going to solve. So setting up our proportions now, I have 15 orders to one day, and putting that into a fraction, I have 15 orders at the top and one day at the bottom. I equal that to my next ratio, which is X orders to 30 days. Once again, we don't know how many orders we can accomplish in that 30 days. So for the orders, which are at the top, I'm going to put X at the top. And then I'm going to put 30 at the bottom because we have the 30 days. We don't know how many days, we put our days at the bottom. Now to solve x, we're going to cross multiply. Once again, you guys can start whichever way you guys want. If you want to start off with the 15, you can, or if you want to start off with the x, you can. Either way, same thing. So here I have 1 times x, which 1 times x is just 1x. Or remember, anytime you have a 1 in front of the x, that literally means you have 1x. So this can also mean that you just have x. And then we cross multiply our other part, which is 15 times 30. So I have 15 times 30 gives me 450. Now, I can divide by the coefficient here, which is 1, but the reason that I keep telling you guys that 1 and 1x and x are exactly the same thing is because if I take that 1 and divide it on both sides, I actually just get this exact same number that I had originally. So that's why 1x and x are the exact same thing. So I have x equals 450, and our main unit that we were trying to find here was orders, so I have 450 orders. Okay, if you have any other questions, make sure that you ask the substitute, or you can email me, Miss Chavez, and we can go from there.